All right, what's up, chosen ones? I'm going to hit y'all with some messages today since it's the new moon and I'm seeing this 444 synchronicity. What messages do we have for the 144,000? For the chosen ones, the elect ones, star seeds. Lovingkindness. So behind that was Akashic record activation and spiritual abundance. So loving kindness, as I was shuffling through the cards, I was really thinking, I really should have been going to my little Bible for this, but the scripture about loving kindness is, God saying, because I have always known you. Before you were born, God has known you. And God has made you specifically for the journey and the battles that, you will encounter. And God says it's with loving kindness that I have drawn you to me. And, if you have experienced being drawn to God, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And that's that thing of many are called, but few are chosen. And the chosen is God drawing you to him with loving kindness. And it doesn't have anything to do with your actions. So people will say, how are they the chosen ones and they drink? How are they the chosen ones and they, smoke weed? How are they the chosen ones and they're, transgender? How are they the chosen ones and they're, always getting in trouble with the law? They love to fight. Well, it doesn't really matter what you are doing. It is God saying, because I have always known thee. Therefore, it's with loving kindness that I have drawn thee unto me. Right? And so for me, it was really about this experience of, the things that I was going through that kind of brought me to tarot, like a very tumultuous, like kind of relationship drama that left me feeling, heartbroken, left me with a lot of questions, left me feeling like, what is really going on? Like, why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? How could I have done anything differently? And then kind of going through all of that for a while and then coming to like prayer that really asking God to, kind of deliver me from, this situation, from feeling the way that I'm feeling about this. And I think that's what it is. It's like, if you're obsessed with some relationship that where this person that probably, was plotting against you, all these things you didn't see, they didn't really love you, they were using you for whatever things, right? And then when you finally, are like, I just have to turn it over to God. When you come to God with it, and that's kind of what God wants you to do, is to like come to Him, right? And so it is in that moment that for me that I was drawn to God. And when I say drawn, I mean like I saw in the spirit where for me, I was having like a kind of, typical dream that perhaps was like a prophetic dream, where I was seeing like certain things kind of unfolding that, the energy certainly did happen later. But in the midst of that, I was like pulled up into what I would describe as like a whirlwind, like a tornado of sorts, but almost like, like sparkly twilight. And as I'm pulled up, I can kind of see certain things, around me, kind of swirling around me, and then finally seeing what perhaps people would describe as like, if you were able to view the Akashic record. And for me, it's almost like seeing a laptop open, or like an envelope open, a letter opening. And as soon as it opened, it was like perhaps a change in the Akashic, or an activation. But it opened, and I was suddenly transported to a new place. And in this new place, there was this element of directions. Like I could feel myself looking in one direction and then changing directions. And as I changed directions, I could feel myself being pulled forward, and I could feel like whatever this new thing was pulling into me. So we're like being pulled together. And the first thing I thought was, because the very first thing that I saw were, it was almost like I was looking to the sky, but then I'm seeing like, and so I'm thinking, is this like aliens? Is this like an alien invasion? But then I'm seeing like these two giant beasts, which feels very biblical. But they were like golden llama-like animals. Very golden, very brilliant. And on the backdrop, it's like a sea of rolling green hills and a very, very brilliant blue sky. And I see the animals kind of like stampeding, these two giant beasts kind of coming toward me. But then as they approach me, I see that they're just grazing. They've stopped, and they're kind of just like there in the green field. And then 3 spirits came down onto me. One central spirit, and I describe them as being like dressed like Old Testament people, and I could see like, what looked like robes, but where the face would be, it was almost just like very brilliant light. So I really couldn't see facial features, but I could just see the brilliant light where the face was. These are like light beings. And there's one central one, but I can see the 2 kind of behind and on either side. And they kind of just came down and and just really just touched me. And there was no speaking, but a message was, kind of transferred to me. Like, I received the message, but I did not hear words in this moment. And of course it was a terrifying experience. It was very terrifying. It was really like, it had me shaken up. I woke up in tears, because I'd never, and I'm someone who, I have dreams. I see, passed on loved ones in spirit. I see, I just heard something too. I don't know what that was. If that was my car or what, but I see, quite a bit of things in spirit that, don't leave me as shaken as this experience did. Because I'd never experienced or seen anything like that. And so, after that happened, I kind of woke up in tears. But that was I posted about this contemporaneously, and of course the feedback was oh, you need to lay off the drugs, that kind of thing. Because people just cannot accept the fact that even the Bible says, like, a prophet is only good for like laying hands in his hometown, because the people around you, they're gonna be like, ain't this Joseph's son? They cannot believe that something that they perhaps go to church every weekend and read the Bible could be something that's happening to you. That's just very difficult for them to believe, because it hasn't happened to them, and there's a reason for that. And I think even outside of that experience, I think what happens is that the chosen ones tend to expose people, and not like that you're calling people out, but it's like your behaviors reflect a mirror on other people's behaviors, and it makes them very uncomfortable. So rather than accept that this kind of profound spiritual thing has happened to you, and that you have this profound spiritual understanding that it must be drugs, it must be schizophrenia, it must be it must be witchcraft or something like that. So people are so much more willing to believe that that witchcraft is at work, but not that God is at work. And that's and these are Christians with that type of ideology. They very much will feel like something is more demonic than something being benevolent. And I think if you look, and you don't even have to have a lot, but you'll find that because you are like the chosen, that people will come up against you even when you don't have much. Like they want to undermine you because they want to prove that you are not the chosen, right? And so, but you'll recognize like that even if you don't have a lot of money, you have spiritual abundance. And that is that you can tap into your spiritual abundance at any time. And that is really about, kind of like the teachings of Jesus, where, if you are, Jesus wasn't like a wealthy man. Jesus is this peripatetic. He's moving from place to place. He's homeless. He, is depending on charity wherever he goes. He says the Son of God doesn't have a place to sleep. And so, even in the 3D, if you don't have like a lot of material abundance, what you have is spiritual abundance that you're able to tap into at any time. I was born, I had to say this, I was born into, very, poor community in Mississippi. Not the city of Mississippi, a very small town in Mississippi, a town with like probably the center of like racism in Mississippi. In fact, there's this whole story about, after slavery in the late 1800s where, there was a massacre where at the courthouse, a mob, the Klan of white men, came and shot up and killed all of the black people who were at the courthouse to hear this case where, two, at the time they were called mulatto, but they were probably like, a mix of like black, Native American, and white, were actually suing a white man. And because they were merchants, they were transporting like molasses or something like that. And the story goes that they got some molasses on this white man's suit. And this white man name was Liddell. And so this court case happens. The Klan rides in and kills all the black people on the courthouse. And even to like the late 90s, there were still, those bullet holes are still in the courthouse. I went to the courthouse a few years back. The rope for the noose, the hanging rope, it still hangs in the courthouse. They did eventually untie it, but the rope still hangs there. They still fly a Confederate flag over this courthouse where I grew up. And not only that, but the street that I lived on is called Liddell Road. Because often you'll find that black people still carry the last name of, white slave owners. But my grandmother's, family, they are the Liddells. So everyone who lived on the road were related and carry the name of this person that kind of triggered this very violent, racist, event that took place in this very small town in Mississippi. But I left that community when I was about 15 and went to this kind of boarding school that I had to get accepted to, and it really did kind of change my life in a sense. I went from going to a school that was all black students, and at the school that I went to, of course, it was named after a racist Confederate senator. And it's still named after him to this day. But I left that school and went to this boarding school where now I'm going to school with, very wealthy, a lot of very wealthy white students, a lot of, wealthy Indian students, some wealthy Asian students. And in fact, the black students were now the minority. There was only a handful of us black students. And from there, I went to school still in Mississippi, at Ole Miss, where there was again like a lot of legacy of like racism that still existed. But Ole Miss was changing. While I was there, they changed the mascot from Colonel Red, which was like a mascot who was a Confederate general. They removed that mascot. And but then later I left. I moved to the Northeast. I went to New York, and what really I would see, kind of, I guess you would call them heroes in a sense, but I would see, for example, this guy who was the first black CEO of an advertising agency, and I was like, I kind of wanted to be like him, because this is when I first worked on a big technology client. I was working on Dell. So I worked at a few advertising agencies, and finally I was able to get an opportunity working on a big client, and that was Dell Computers. So I was helping Dell to, sell notebook computers and laptop computers. And they did this experiment. They created an advertising agency And the agency that they created, it was a black man who was the CEO. It was an agency called Emphatico. Now that black man later went on to work on Google, which I was very impressed by that. And then, and kind of, you know, looking at him and watching him, I was able to manifest that for myself. I would eventually go on to another agency that had Google as a client, and I would work on, different Google products, doing their digital media advertising. So what I did was I would buy advertising space for them. And so there was a big, for me, that was a big shift from like my experience in Mississippi to what I was able to manifest in New York City. And believe me, there was very few black people. When I would go to Google out in Mountain View, California, for one of the things I worked on was the kickoff of Google Fiber, which was Google's high-speed megabit internet. And they were rolling it out in certain cities. I think the first rollout was going to be in Kansas City. But when I went out there, again, it was like one of these experiences where I was the only black person in the room, right? And to a certain extent, from where I come from, that feels, just the fact that you're the only black person in the room feels very violent. I don't know if people kind of understand that. Like there's a spatialization and an erasure of black people and keeping black people in check. And so it can be a very uncomfortable experience if you're sensitive to certain kind of things like that. And perhaps some people would say like, oh, well, the only reason you were the one in that room is because you're not black, but I am black. And I may be light skinned, and maybe that perhaps part of that is light skin privilege or whatever, however people want to describe it. And I understand that as well. But it's a very violent thing, kind of existing in spaces where there are no black people, because it is tied to that racist legacy. But a very, you're able to, I go through all of that to say that even after I left that industry, and people say, why would you leave that industry? Because it's like you hit the jackpot. You have like this 6-figure salary. You're a buyer, so you got all these salespeople that take you to Nobu, they take you to Koi, they take you to, all of the nice restaurants around New York City for free, and you just do that, and they give you free gifts, and they take you on trips and things like that. Why would you leave it? But there is a certain sensitivity that I feel like the elect ones have that other people don't have, And so for me, I'm not always just concerned about self. I'm concerned about, the well-being of other people as well. But also it's this thing of, I left that. I was kind of consumed, I was devoting all of my time to work pretty much then. I may get out of work and then go have a drink at a bar, where I then could connect with other black people, right? But when I left that industry, it wasn't easy. But certain things that I wanted to do kind of unlocked for me. Like, I always used to sing this song from The Wiz, when you believe in your heart, I know that no one can change the path that you must go. That's Lena Horne from The Wiz. Love The Wiz, love that. And I ended up meeting someone that I was dating who just so happened to be, Maya Angelou's assistant at the time. Well, actually, when I met them, Maya Angelou had passed away, but they had been Maya Angelou's assistant. And we're very close with, like, people who have worked in The Wiz. So then, like, I'm meeting, like, of course I'm reading, he has, like, books from, directly from Maya Angelou's bookshelf. And I hadn't really read Maya Angelou like that. I knew a few of her poems, but, I'm reading the books that, she had in her home that she'd given some of them to him. and meeting, like, the man who won the first Tony Award for choreography for The Wiz, and going to his theater and up into his private residence and up onto the rooftop and stuff like that, which are like, it's not a monetary experience, but for things that I'm passionate about, that was able to just kind of unfold when I started moving toward, not feeling stuck in certain things and moving toward what I wanted to do. And even like, something as pervasive as The Color Purple. The actress who played The Color Purple on Broadway, she gave me a purple flower from her garden at her home, when in a moment when I was kind of in my melancholy moment, which is, kind of like the whole vibes of The Color Purple. Everyone's seen The Color Purple, but being able to, have that experience coming from, the sticks of Mississippi. And actually, I feel like a lot of people come from the sticks of different places, come from places that are like, very obscure, and God pulls you up and out of that. But even in those situations, I had difficulty with the people that I was around. Like, they don't necessarily understand the experience. They don't necessarily, I had people tell me, like, when I started talking more about God, they were like, don't try to preach to me. I don't want you to preach to me. And that's fine if they don't want me to preach to them, but they can't say that I haven't, said what I had to say. And taking it, sometimes it's just like taking that, believing in yourself, like the song says, when you believe, no one can change the path that you must go. That is I love that song, and Lena Horne singing in The Wiz. Love it, love it, love it, right? But you do have the spiritual abundance, and it's not always about just the material, just getting the money. It's about what you can walk into. And I give you another story. The day that the Migos, they had an album release party for their very last album, and I did not want to go out. And someone called me up and they were like, I'm in town, let's go out. And begrudgingly, I'm like, okay, let's go. And so I took them to this bar, and it was like an obscure night. This is like kind of during, the whole shutdown. So the bars are kind of just now getting back up. But on this particular night, no one was at the bar that we went to. But next door at the bar, I guess the Migos were having like a pop-up album release party. And so I see all these black SUVs of everyone pulled up, kind of like an exclusive kind of crowd of people who are waiting for them to get out of the cars. And I don't really even know who it was, but in my head, I knew that because I'm able to see things in the spirit, I was saying, this is a dangerous situation to be around whoever this is. Because this kind of like outside of the club situation is when niggas start shooting. And so rather than wait around to see who was getting out of the car, and I'm sure, the Migos, their rapper friends, Cardi B, Cardi's sister, they were all, and actually I saw later, like on social media, like, and they partied, they had a good time, nothing happened, but I was picking up on that energy. And then of course later a very similar situation happened where, Takeoff was killed kind of outside of the club. I was there more so at the beginning of the night. But that was kind of like when he died, it was kind of like after a night of clubbing. But kind of even just having the intuition is spiritual abundance, having that ability to see. That is the spiritual abundant kind of thing. And I have a lot of stories like that, I just recently talked about something that happened, with Kanye West at the time. Like I was working with a client, and they had done some work with Kanye, and I didn't even know we were doing work with Kanye, but sitting in the meeting and someone talks about this whole little situation with Kanye and trying to imply that he was gay and things like that, being privy to that kind of conversation, being privy to I met who a lot of people look up to, Gary V, very, very early on, like maybe right around the time when he had just released the book Crush It. And I'm in a meeting with like me, Gary V, these two, Israeli guys who are our client, and maybe like two other people, and I didn't know who he was for the first time, and he was kind of name dropping. He name dropped Dr. Oz, and I didn't know who Dr. Oz was at the time either. They had to tell me that it's like Oprah's doctor. But yeah, like we all have these different experiences. You never know who is watching you, what kind of rooms you're going to walk into, and what all of this preparation is for you. But you just have to remember that God has always known you, and it is with loving kindness. It's with God's loving kindness that He will draw you to Him. So this is really about why you are protected. It is your protection is God's loving kindness. Your spiritual abundance is God's loving kindness. The fact that you're able to have these Akashic record activations, that is because of God's loving kindness. It's not anything that you're doing. It's these experiences that I've had. It's nothing very I like to say I'm smart. I like to say that I'm very creative, but there's a lot of smart and creative people. There's a lot of light-skinned people, but my experiences were mine because they were unique for me. And it is with loving kindness that God has laid out the journey that you're going to go on to, chosen ones. And they say that the spiritual attacks, they turn up after you have these activations, so you have to be prepared for that too. But you don't have anything to worry about. It's like how David spoke about Goliath. He said, who is this uncircumcised Philistine, right? That he would be coming up against the Most High God's army, the army of the Most High God. And it's the same thing with you. Who are these people, and you can fill in the blank there with like haters, low-level kitchen witches, backstabbing co-workers, whoever. Who are they that they would be coming up against you when God has ordained this purpose for you? Who are these people? And they may actually hit you in the face, but they can't do too much more than that, right? And after they do it, you'll be like, fine, just it doesn't even bother you, and that pisses them off even more. I'll witness about one other thing that happened when I was a child. So I went to a camp. It was a 7-day Adventist camp. I'm not really into any kind of denomination per se, but I was a part of a Baptist church. My dad's church is Baptist, but we did go to a 7-day Adventist camp, which is a bit different because they worship on Saturday on the Sabbath like the Jews, right? And at this camp, I can remember there was a hurricane that was coming, and the hurricane was headed toward Florida, and the preacher at the camp was going to have to leave early, but we all prayed, and he preached about peace be still. And after I left, and he didn't have to leave because the hurricane kind of stopped out there in the ocean. And I can remember, I needed to verify this. So when I got back home, got on the internet, I saw that I pulled it up where the meteorologist in Florida, I'm back in Mississippi at the time, is saying like, they've never seen a hurricane behave like this, where one just is moving through the Gulf and then just stops and stays still there. And so there was a sense of like our prayers for peace be still actually caused that hurricane to just stop there in the ocean. So, and I experienced that as a child, and because I knew that when Ida was hit, I was in New Orleans at my sister's house when Ida was headed there, and I just kind of felt like, you know what, I'm just going to pray about it and just sleep and not worry about it. And I did that, and like all around my sister's community, it was flooded everywhere. It even flooded right out in the subdivision that she lived in, and the water came right up to her back doorstep, but it did not enter the house. And the tree fell onto the house next door, but it did not fall onto her house. And we were very much safe there. And we eventually had to kind of escape out of there, even though we stayed through the storm. Like afterwards, all the electricity is down. We saw how bad it was. It was flooding everywhere. And we even, I wasn't driving, but someone else was driving and drove us through some water. And I was like, that was a very dangerous situation, because as soon as we got through it, the police blocked it off and said no one else drive through there. And we made it out of that situation. But I knew that we would, because I felt like we just needed to pray about it. And I kind of feel like there was a reason that I needed to be down there because actually I'd been down there with them for a while. And when I first got there, I kind of sensed, I told them, a storm is coming. There's a storm coming. And actually, even before Katrina, I had been in New Orleans like right before Katrina, and I don't know if I sensed that something was happening in Katrina at that time, but I do remember I wanted to move to New Orleans, and my dad told me, you don't want to live in New Orleans because it's in a bowl. If it ever floods, it's going to the whole city will be underwater. And I remember thinking, who's ever heard of that? Like, who's ever heard of a whole city being underwater? And sure enough, when Katrina hit, the whole city was underwater. But I understood that you just pray about it, and then you let God do His work, and you will be safe. And I have a lot of situations like that where I had to pray my way out of it. And really, you never really have anything to fear, is what I've come to realize. So even though I've kind of left my big 6-figure jobs and whatnot, it may have been it's been a challenge since then, but I've made it through it. I'm still here. I'm still spiritually abundant, and I am now closer to my calling, which is this thing of spirituality, which has been a part of my life for a long time in certain capacity.